Hi, everybody. Adrian Fontes here. Did you know that the Democrats of Greater Tucson has a website, thedgt.org, and if you subscribe, it's only 20 bucks. You can support this great weekly communication where folks get together. Sometimes there's candidates, sometimes folks like me pop on to help understand what's going on in the world. The Democrats of Greater Tucson, thedgt.org. Join up today.
So everyone's going to have a chat with veteran Arizona political reporter Joe Ferguson, who recently joined the Arizona Agenda, about recent developments and trends in Arizona politics and journalism. Joe will be familiar to political junkies who followed his reporting on local government and politics for the Arizona Daily Star. For those who weren't reading the papers before 2020, you'd be hard-pressed to find another reporter in Tucson who knows as much about local politics as Joe does. He was knocking around Tucson with the likes of Mayor Jonathan Rothschild and Chuck Huckleberry were in charge. He challenged Republicans and Democrats alike, all part of his training under longtime former editor Joe Purcell at the Star. Back then, whenever there was anything political going on, chances are Joe was either sitting in the front row or badgering the people who wouldn't let him in. When he worked with Kurt in the Star newsroom, Joe was always digging through troves of data or finding new ways to report on local government shenanigans. He was the guy we all went to when our beats touched on the city of Tucson or Pima County. So let's give a warm Democrats of Greater Tucson welcome to Joe Ferguson.
Thanks, everybody. That's very kind. I am used to asking questions, so I'll talk a little bit about who I am and what I do, and hopefully give you plenty of time to ask me questions, because I'm not so great at the public speaking part. I was only a politician once. I briefly left journalism to become a constable, so during the pandemic, I was a constable for a while, so I do have some background being an elected official, but it didn't stick. So I've been, for most of my life, a journalist. Prior to the Daily Star, I worked at the Flagstaff publication, the Daily Sun. Prior to that, I worked at the U of A at the Arizona Daily Wildcat. So this is a clean break for me from getting the words Arizona Daily out of the title, out of me working at a reporting studio. So I'm very grateful to be back here in Tucson reporting on the supervisors, the city council, and anything else that comes in between. I have degrees in journalism, history, political science from the University of Arizona, as well as a certificate from Georgetown University, where I went to briefly, where I worked at the Capitol. So I kind of live and eat and breathe this stuff, and so I've been doing it for a while. Yeah, I've been to many DGT meetings, especially back when they used to have them in person. So I strangely miss some of the Chinese food. So I don't know why, but it was always a good time. It was always good to meet people that way. But I've kind of done a little bit of everything when it comes to politics. I've been the politician. I've knocked on doors. I've collected signatures. I've scrutinized reports. I've sat in thousands of city and county meetings by now. And I'm well known by most of the people, although you guys have a tough row ahead if you're going to have all the city council candidates come before you. There is at least 12 that I can count now. So it's a big field this year. So that's a heavy lift. And so I'll be in the audience watching. So with that, I really don't have a lot to say. The Tucson Agenda is a small newsletter that anybody can subscribe to for free, and it'll show up in your mailbox every morning. We work Monday through Friday and try to give you the best news that we can, maybe in a different tone than the old dry newspaper format. So
James Stevenson wants to know, are the alternative media sources, such as your Arizona Agenda, getting decent financial support? And I guess attendant to that, how can we support them?
So, I mean, I think that, this has not been something I've been very comfortable with. We are doing well between the Arizona Agenda, which is the Phoenix version of our publication, and the Tucson Agenda. We've been able to pay for 4 staffers and hire freelancers, but we're always growing. We're always trying new things. I invite people here today to just simply sign up for the newsletter if it's something that you like. And, after a couple weeks, it's stuff that you can learn to, rely on for your news. There is a paid subscription model for that. But at the same time, I'm very proud of the fact that all of my journalism is free and accessible to everybody here without paywalls or without a lot of hoops to jump through. We appreciate, of course, paid subscribers, but certainly, my job is to make sure that everybody in the community has the information they need when they go to the polls, when there's an issue before the city council, whatever it is that, impacts your life. I'm glad that our journalism is free for you to access.
Barton wants to know if you think Elon Musk and his like are going to try and shut down outlets like the Arizona Agenda.
Somewhere somebody's going to get mad at me for saying this, but I think that Elon Musk can try. And I think that he might be able to use lawsuits and lawyers and his money to shut down one. But if you shut down one, we're going to be a Hydra. Two will spawn in its place. I know plenty of people who worked at Gawker who are now working elsewhere, doing the same kind of journalism they did when they were at Gawker. So, the elitists can absolutely try to silence the media, but we're just going to go rogue. When the newspaper isn't selling what it used to, we're going to be on a different market. So I think that new media is going to fill that void that, and help restaff the journalism that you were used to 10, 15 years ago.
Okay. And Susie Anderson has her hand up.
Hi, Joe. I remember seeing you at the Kettle.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we were in person. So I'm so glad to see you back in journalism.
Thank you.
My question to you is about your experiences as a constable and working within county government.
Sure.
What did you learn and that might help you now in journalism?
So, I think that I came from a very old school version of journalism. I had some great professors at the U of A and at Georgetown, and they put up this kind of firewall between politics and journalism. And so I could talk to politicians, but I didn't get involved in campaigns. I didn't get into their rooms when they're making decisions. And as a politician, as it was COVID, as we were talking about evictions and moratoriums, I had a lot to say, and it turned the script on me, and where I was talking to friends of mine, rivals in the journalism world, and answering their questions. And I realized, how difficult sometimes it was to answer a question, but sometimes, not be able to fully answer the question. And so I like to point out that I was labeled a rebel constable pretty early on for going in a different direction than what most constables do consider their job to be. We did more, we helped more, we offered resources. We did the first moratorium before Doug Ducey did on doing evictions. We refused to do them before because it just wasn't sensible at the time. We got a lot of pushback for that. So I think it really informed me about, how doing the right thing is a lot harder sometimes than it looks like on the outside. And then I did spend some years working for other elected officials, and I learned about the bureaucracy. And while we were able to make some accomplishments at these places, the bureaucracy is a lot and can really slow down effective governance sometimes. And so I learned a little bit more about the pressures on the people that I report about.
Okay. And Ben has a question. Ben, go ahead. Unmute yourself. There you go.
Hi, Joe. A lot has been made recently about the Trump administration trying to throw a bunch of controversy and shit at the wall to flood the headlines and keep the real sinister stuff they're doing under the radar. How do you as a journalist approach finding out what are those things going under the radar that are maybe not getting the national media headlines, and how should we, the people, make sure that we are seeking out that information and appropriately preparing ourselves when perhaps a lot of media resources are focused on big headlines?
So, I mean, I started before the Trump administration started, and we spent a lot of time getting prepared for making sure that we were knowledgeable about certain types of things that were on the ground. I spent a lot of time focusing on immigration specifically, but we talk to people every day. I think that's the most important thing, is that I am talking to elected officials. I am talking to minor bureaucrats. I am talking to everybody I can to say, how is this affecting you? And relying on them to have an honest conversation with me. Now, I have it with 7 different people when it comes to the city council. So each take is a little bit different. Each staffer has a different idea about it. But for you, my suggestion is to consume a lot of media. The Tucson Agenda is great. The Daily Star is great. The Tucson Sentinel is great. Arizona Alumni is great. Spend time reading all of them. Spend time, looking at other sources I haven't named today. Border Chronicles, great group of people. So they're all doing different things, and we're all biting at different pieces of it so that we can get to that point. Because I have the same concern you do. We are talking about all the freeze in federal spending, but I have a lot of questions as to why certain people were, over at OMB last night on the weekend. We don't know what that's about yet. I'm hopeful my colleagues in DC are going to write better about that than I can from here. But at the same time, we understand that there is more than just the executive orders going on, and we're trying to be cognizant of it. And so for us, it's a lot of questions. For us, it's a lot of pushback. For us, we try. Today, I found myself writing about Steve Christie, demanding that they release a memo that Laura Conover wrote. For some reason, she doesn't want that memo to be read by you or anybody else here, for that matter. And so I found myself agreeing with Steve Christie on that the memo should be released and the public should know. So I'm having those fights for you, making sure that we get out as much news as we can. I'm very blessed now that I'm no longer working at a print publication, because I can write 10,000 words if I need to in a day, and there's nothing stopping me. So I don't have to dumb it down.
Rod Norris wants to know if you feel that our standard national media has let us down with dishonest journalism, or if there's other causes for, what's going on right now in the media.
I think, dishonest journalism is a great way of putting it. And I think that we're fractured. And so I have an audience, the Daily Star has an audience, everybody has an audience, and I don't cater to it, but I certainly try to have a conversation with my audience in terms of what they want to see and what I'm not doing. I want feedback in that way. And I think the problem is that there are now so many niches that if you want a certain type of entertainment journalism that doesn't necessarily do anything other than feed your biases and not necessarily give you answers, I think there's a lot of that there. And the only way this is going to work is if the free market doesn't reward that. And unfortunately, right now, the free market is rewarding niche journalism that does not have a responsibility to the Society for Professional Journalists standards of what journalism should look like and should be followed. And instead, they get paid just to get viewers and keep people entertained. Whether or not things are accurate or not, that is settled in lawsuits months later, years later, it seems.
Yeah.
So I think it's hard to get dishonest journalism out of there, but at the same time, I think that having a good, diverse media diet is important for everybody here.
Lee, you have a question for Joe.
Yes, I do. It has to do with elections and the reporting of election results.
Sure.
I found in doing my own research through Secretary of State's office, the county offices, Ballotpedia, in Arizona, there tends to be a very strong bias to reporting the percentages that each candidate receives, not the ballot totals. And then when you get to the point where the election is certified, nobody seems to report what the final result happens to be. How many votes for this, how many votes for that, so that people who might be skeptical of the process or are deeply skeptical of the process actually see the numbers presented to them from a reasonably official or authoritative source. My question is how do you handle it, or how do you see doing that? And do you think that this has any direct effect or indirect effect towards people not trusting the ballot itself, as well as in terms of reporting it to a larger general population, general knowledge audience?
So I'll just start with me. I hyper specialized when I was much younger, and I was going to be a political journalist. That was always what I did. I went to Georgetown specifically to get a education based on, working with economists, different people that helped further my campaign. I got a political science degree, again, to understand things better. And when I worked at the Star, what I did is that instead of just refreshing the website, we had a small computer program that was pulling stuff directly from their statistics. So in addition to the dumbed down version that's on the website, I was getting all the information that was coming in. I was, finding out which ones were being counted, which ones were being held back for different reasons, which ones were being done. So we had a better idea of the information, where there was outstanding votes and things like that. And so, there's more information that is out there on the data side that isn't always presented to everybody who wants it. I find that a lot of the websites that the county, the city, the state uses tries to give you what they think is the most important information, and it's usually vote counts. There isn't a lot of outstanding vote counts. There isn't a lot of this is the number of people who have to come back with their ID a couple days from now, things like that. That information isn't prioritized in a way. And I appreciate that they have a job to do and a lot of different masters. And so I think that it's getting a sophisticated audience the information that they want while still meeting the other goals. And so certainly when I was doing election night stuff, there were going to be pauses in results. And during that time, I would spend time breaking down those information. Usually it wouldn't end up in the paper, usually it'd end up on social media, but we would try to talk about those things to get that information. And then when I was asked to write, 2 days later, 3 days later, when the election notes are called, we try to get into that information of did Paul Cunningham, for example, win his ward in the general election? Did Democrats show up and vote for him, or technically speaking, did that? And so we would do things like heat maps to show that kind of information. So the information's out there, but for a mass audience, most people just want the basics. And so it's just trying to get both elected officials and reporters like myself to give you more information because it's important to you. And I think that the more information that I can put out there, you should feel better about your ballot, your safety, and your vote. The only problem is that the other side of the coin is people are looking for small bits and pieces of information to repeat over and over and over again to make their point, which generally is a different narrative that may not be rooted in the truth.
Okay, Ellen, you have a question for Joe.
Hi, Joe.
Hi.
My question is, after Trump's victory, a lot of people just like untethered themselves from their constant diet of news because I don't know about y'all, but I think everybody I know in our group was following the news on a half-hour basis or more. And afterwards, I had to untether because my anxiety levels went through the roof. I'm curious if your publication has data on how many people detach themselves from their news diet, and if there's any talk, in the back rooms about how to present this information in a way that doesn't, make all of our hearts race all the time.
So I've been with the agenda for about a month now, but I know Nicole, Hank, and Kurt very well. I've worked with them all at the Star at one point or another. And so I think that we've had a lot of conversations about making sure that every day does not have the word Trump in our publications, that we focus on local issues, we focus on other things that are going on. We have concerted to put a laugh into our newsletter. At the bottom of the thing, we try to find something that's, relatable, newsworthy, but also funny. Today, we talked about the fact that Old Tucson's going to have their very own running of the bulls, and we wondered how many people are fast enough to outrun a bull. I will not be there. I won't be there. But at the same time, I think we've made a concerted effort to do things differently. One thing that I'm very proud of is that we printed something last week about news literacy. It wasn't designed to lecture anyone, but it was absolutely there to help people decide whether or not to press the share button, to press the retweet button, to press the like button when there's questions that you should be asking yourself before you did that. So we did, instead of a news article that day, we did a media literacy guide on all the things that are probably flooding your socials and mine as well. And so we have data on that, and we find that those kind of articles do very, very well. And so rather than doom and gloom, rather than non-answers from politicians, we try to do things a little bit differently now. We're all veterans of working for, mass media and newspapers in specific. And so we're doing things different because we have a different platform, and it gives us the opportunity to do things, tell stories in a different way.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. And Maria Hidalgo has her hand up.
Hi.
Hey, Maria.
Hi, how are you? Hi, Joe. I guess my question started with an answer you gave earlier about your background in terms of your education in journalism. And I guess I'm just curious. I no longer read the Washington Post. I don't, the New York Times from time to time. I really go to NPR, maybe Reuters. What do you know is being taught in our schools of journalism going forward now that social media is such a, I don't know if it's a blessing or a pariah or both, but what is the future? There's not much future left for me. I'm at the end of my life cycle here. But I'm curious as to what are the future journalists can we expect?
I'm glad you asked. Andrea Kennedy mentioned this, but I taught at the U of A for about 6 years prior to becoming a constable. And so I taught reporting public affairs specifically. And so we talked about social media, we talked about how to do sourcing. And at some point, when COVID hit, I had to teach kind of like this. I wasn't able to teach in person. And so we definitely had things like that. And so I would test my students. I would tell them, don't use Wikipedia, don't use Wikipedia. And then I would give a quiz. And the day before the quiz, I would change something very small on Wikipedia. I would turn a Republican into a Democrat. I would do something like that. And that information was available in 9 other different places, but it was wrong on Wikipedia. And so for every student who got that question wrong, we know where they were, we know how they got it, and the next day I would fix Wikipedia. But we would challenge them on social media. We would show them how to use it well, and we'd show them how to do it wrong. And so I pulled away from the old print model and really try to show a hybrid model in terms of gathering the news, telling the story, regardless of what it came to. And we had a lot of great students really surprise me and show us that they could pivot well to that. And so whether it was podcasts or whether it was on TV or whether it was, TikTok kind of tiny videos, I gave them the fundamentals of how to do the reporting correctly and showed them how, you could be led astray digitally really quickly when you are sitting at home writing a story for your mean old professor and all you have to do is rely on the internet.
And the reason I wanted to be here is because I'm finding myself so carefully now curating my news.
Yeah.
I'm choosing not to be in an echo chamber. I'm very careful about that, and why I wanted to meet and see you, because the fourth estate, I believe, is failing us so spectacularly.
I hear you, and I understand. My diet includes a lot of places that I don't necessarily agree with them politically, but at the same time, I want to make sure that I'm in those spaces, reading those things to see what they're saying, because it's important. I've got news alerts for certain politicians, and so if the Daily Caller writes about Regina Romero tomorrow, I will be reading that entire article, maybe skeptically, but at the same time, I think the best way forward is a news diet. And I don't have a subscription to the Washington Post either, and I had one for decades. And the New York Times, for that matter, as well. And it's not about whether I can afford it, it's more about where I put my dollars. And I'd much rather support other local journalists that I compete with than paying for the New York Times or the Washington Post at this point.
Great.
NPR is a great source, by the way. I think you're doing real well in terms of who you're choosing to use.
So Robert Bulacek says, how how do you, because how should journalists, so I assume you're doing what you think is best practices, handle both siderism and what he calls sane washing when it comes to fact checking in their writing?
So I have long thrown out the idea that there are two sides to every story. I think there are one side. I think there are five sides. I think there are those. And I've definitely found myself in situations where I've been criticized that I didn't take X into account or things of that nature. Real quickly, and I think he'll appreciate this, Robert, is that I worked up to the Daily Sun where my boss got national attention because he decided that in 2006 that the debate over climate change was over and that he would never, ever again write a single op-ed or letter to the editor that suggested otherwise. He made it a space that it just would not exist in. And he got a lot of feedback for that and a lot of pushback, but he kept his ideals on it. And so I've done the same thing. I have definitely gone head to head with different people, including some of our elected officials who are in office right now, who want to have one narrative, and it's my job to push back on that. It means that my Christmas card list is smaller. It means some people walk by me when we're at the grocery store. But at the same time, I think it's really important to tell the story in the way that it's important for the reader, not trying to appease as many sides as possible. And so it really comes down to a gut check. Thankfully, I've got some smart editors working with me to, say maybe we need to write about this, maybe we don't. And so that's how I handle it. It's different for every reporter, I suspect, but I think a lot of us agree that two sides of a story is an antiquated model that just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah,
And
especially
there's too
when
many
there's so much
people
propaganda out
making
there. Yeah.
and there's too many people making disingenuous arguments about one side or the other that just don't need to be covered.
All right. Why don't we bring in Paul Stapleton Smith before I continue with chat questions?
Indeed, thank you so much. And Joe Ferguson, thank you. Thank you for all that you've done and for all the work that we've been able to do together collectively. But having said that, you used the word disingenuous. So I have 14 new members, union members on our political action team. Post-election, they're like, we don't want to stop. How can we be involved? So they're doing city council meetings. They're going to state ledge, RTS. And then we have a federal team because federal's all jazzy, sexy for some people. I like how you did that. Yeah, whatever. But having said that, you said disingenuous. So when they're meeting elected officials for the first time and attending these meetings, there's the public part of the meeting because they're attending, right? And then we have our meetings with those elected officials. And I tried to explain to them in a dignified and honorable way, Joe, and this is my question. Forgive me for the setup. There's good faith elected officials and there's bad faith. They purport to do one thing. I do news conferences. I hold press conferences. I do that. And I know different. How do you, as a reporter, and particularly in your role now, my brother, is how do you sift that? But to Sister's earlier question, the context of news, because you know who's acting in good faith. I'm just going to suggest, and who's not. Right. So how do we do that as because we're all activists on this call, right? I know almost everybody, you do, everybody on this call. How do we do that so that we're not just victimized by the hypocrites and the posturing? Long question. Sorry, brother.
I think the first thing you got to do is you have to get educated before you shake their hand. Before you sit down with them, before you're with them, you got to know what they ran on. You got to know whose money they took. You've got to know what they said last week, last month, last year. And because of those things, that's what makes reporters incredibly dangerous, is that we do know those things. And I won't get into anybody's name, but I've certainly been in editorial board meetings where they say, well, I ran on this campaign, and I'll go, no, you didn't. You did this. And, we'll get into an argument to the point where they have to capitulate. And you can't do that in the middle of a news conference. You can't do that in the middle of a news meeting. But in your meetings, you can say, hey, I'm a bit confused. You say you're for affordable housing, but you voted against this, this, and this. What's going on here? And I think that having a good media diet, doing your own research are really important to these kind of moments where you're going to have to push back, because they're often used to just people nodding their heads, shaking their hand, thanking them for their time, when they work for you.
James Stevenson makes a suggestion that perhaps you should have an archive of evergreen articles like those on media literacy, which I think is a good suggestion. And Jim Hannon wants to know, how does the Tucson and Arizona agenda plan to cover the two congressmen from Tucson?
They're my responsibility. I think that we all know that Congressman Grijalva, who I've known for decades, is in poor health. And so we know that something will happen at some point where that race may require, a special election, and that might require some people to leave their posts, and it could get messy. So I'm pretty well versed on what happens next, and we'll write about that. I think that, covering Congressman Grijalva is different than covering Congressman Sisquani. At the moment, Congressman Grijalva is too sick to really do a lot of votes. So I think we just count on him for very, very important votes that may be ahead of us. As for Mr. Sisquani, he's going to receive regular scrutiny from me, as I would anybody else, as well as our two Democratic senators. I think that knowing what they vote on is important, and we have tools that we are building to essentially automate that process to say, this is what they voted on. I worked really hard at the start to start doing that, and I thought it was important just to say, here's what they voted on in Congress this week. It doesn't take long. It's just a couple paragraphs, but I think that kind of stuff doesn't get reported often and regularly enough for everybody in this room to know what their congressman did last week.
Agree.
And so that's how I generally want to handle it, but please understand, I'm still trying to find out where the lights are in the building.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate your focus on what they do rather than what they say. That's most important. Rod Norris wants to know, where do you get your national news, and how do you test it for accuracy, truth, and political bias?
So I have a network that's just different. 30 years, going to different schools, meeting different people. I have a lot of friends in journalism. Like, I follow individuals on their socials and where they work and where they go to next. So my diet is certainly reading almost every Arizona publication that's in Southern Arizona, as well as my former home at the Daily Sun in Flagstaff, as well as the Republic. At night, I watch the TV stations here. And then for national news, I look to a lot of different publications, although NPR is certainly in my diet. Occasionally, I'll get news alerts for things like the Washington Post or the New York Times, but they don't write about Tucson or Southern Arizona in a contextual way that's important for me at the end of the day. It doesn't answer my questions, but I've got friends that work at National Journal, at the Atlantic, at the New Yorker, Boston Globe, things like that. And so I follow them just because I know them. We were in a foxhole somewhere at one time.
I think you might have answered this, but Sherry Goncharski asks, what are your plans to cover the candidates for CD6? And I know there's at least one person who has indicated that she's running. I assume she means the Democrats who are considering challenging in CD6.
So everybody who's run for office knows that it's paperwork first, signature second, getting money third, and then starting to make statements fourth. And I'll do the same thing. Somebody makes an announcement they're running for office, I'll take them at their word once they filed with the FEC. Once they've turned in their signatures or otherwise qualified for the ballot, I'll announce that at that time. When they start, getting money and spending money, I'll report on what that money looks like and where it went, things like that. And we're also working on some things behind the scenes where we're going to try to identify power groups that are really funding elections. A lot of people know Mr. Click and know that he has spent decades, fueling different elections and helping Republicans get elected and helping other Republicans not get elected. So we're looking for the new Jim Click. We're looking for the new people that are really putting their money in to do that, both on the Democratic side and on the Republican side. And so I think that will be another way to kind of show how the business community, how regular people are voting with their dollars since, Trump took office.
Mm-hmm. Paula might mispronounce this, Schlussberg wants to know, what do you think of the Guardian's coverage of national news and national politics? I believe the Guardian's a British newspaper.
It is. And on it, we have a tie to the British newspaper as well. So one of our founders at the Arizona Agenda is now working for the Guardian. So Rachel is there doing her thing. And so she has an incredible grasp of Arizona politics. And you will see her byline in the Guardian about Arizona topics on a regular basis. And so our colleagues in the foreign press often are Americans who are working for foreign publications. And so they should, I can't think of a foreign press right off the top of my head that I would distrust immediately, but I would absolutely give them credence. I think that they're doing a great job, and The Guardian is one of the last bastions in Europe of really good, solid reporting that, goes where the story is. And I can think of some really great stories they've broken over the decades.
Yeah, I follow the Guardian closely too. Well, we've had a couple of inquiries now that weren't here when we first signed on and talked about the painting behind you, but a couple people have inquired about it. Do you want to tell us about it?
Sure. I fell in love with Roy Lichtenstein when I was in college. I saw this exact print at a video store, and knowing nothing about art and really nothing at all at that age, I went to a print shop and I said, "Oh, I want to buy a copy of that print." And they said, "Well, they only in this really big size, and the print is $20." And I said, "Oh, that's great." And they said, "Well, we can print it for you too." And I didn't ask at the time how much that would cost. And so I said, "Sure." And I came back, and then I gave them my rent check. And so I've been lugging this thing around for the last 30 years. I've always liked his stuff. I've sent out postcards of his. I've seen him at the Smithsonian when he had a touring exhibit. So, I've really liked his stuff. But at the same time, it was a rent check 30 years ago. And so I feel like I have to carry it with me wherever I go now.
Yeah,
Right.
Paula
But-
wants to know what Rachel's last name is to follow her at the Guardian.
Lynn Yang.
And Andrea would like to know, she questions, did you say you worked in DC? And if so, can you tell us some stories about your time in DC?
Yes, I went to DC as a foolish college kid. I applied for a program that was called the Institute for Political Journalism. It was a 3-month course where I would be taught by a priest, a economist, and a reporter that worked in the White House. Those were my 3 classes. At the time, I had no idea that it was an ideological front to give a conservative viewpoint to new journalists. And so I figured it out on day 2 and then bucked the system for the rest of the time. I got a fairly good internship with the Atlantic. And so I worked there. And after about a week, my boss realized I could do more than just deliver the mail, got a press pass, and spent 6 months, or a little bit less than 6 months, covering mostly the House. One of the big things we covered was CAFTA, and at night I slept in my Georgetown dorm. So, I did well. I did one day at the White House covering for somebody who got sick, but mostly I covered the House and the Senate.
Jim Hannigan wants to know, are you monitoring right-wing talk radio? Because he sees that that plays a lot of role in the right-wing media machine.
So I spend some time doing it, and I always have. So when I did say that I read stuff that I didn't agree with, that included right-wing radio. For a long time, I listened to the DeSimone show in the morning on my way into work. But right now, my focus really is just covering the head of the Pima County Republican Party. She has an hour-long show. And so I'm very interested to see what she talks about, because she's in the know as well as, leading their policy and discussion. So I try to listen to her show on a regular basis. If I can't catch it at when it's on, I usually listen to the podcasts at night.
Interesting. What's the name of her podcast?
Oh God, you put me on the spot. I've only been listening to it for a little while, but I'd have to look it up. I'm
That's
very
okay.
Okay, Susie Anderson has her hand up.
Yeah, Joe, when you talked about being in the House and the Senate all that time ago when you
Yes,
were a
all that time
student.
ago.
Yeah. Okay. Have you been back, or do you have a sense of how much of a change there's been, not just politically, but personally, with the types of people who we've elected to those offices? Do you have any comments about that and
Yes.
where the country is headed?
Well, I think that, the thing, there's two things that I'm going to talk about. I think that the House and the Senate have become more ideological than they were when I was there approximately 20 years ago. I think that generally speaking, people that were middle of the road, blue dogs, and those kind of terms that we're all familiar with have been chased off. They don't exist in the way they used to, and that's true for our legislature here in Arizona as well. I certainly have, seen some people that were good public citizens that may have had a different letter behind their name than mine, but they did good work. They're gone now, and they've been replaced by people who are more ideologically based. I think it's a dangerous precedent. I don't think it's good. I think social media amplifies their voice, even though they still only get one vote in Congress. And so I think things have changed. I know that the media vilified her for her stance on the filibuster, but I'm glad the filibuster rules are what they are today. I think we have a stronger democracy because of it. As for my colleagues in media, I think that they're still younger than I am, but I still think that they're there doing the same job that they've always done. Very few people get into journalism to get rich or to become a senator someday. Most of us are in it for just the love of and the passion. It's a calling for some of us. So I don't think that's changed. I unfortunately worked at a very closed-in publication. Working for the Atlantic it was always owned by a billionaire, and that billionaire wanted good publications. She hasn't changed. They still want the same things. They own the Atlantic. They own a lot of other publications that cover it. So, I know those people. They're still there. They're still doing the same job, and their coverage really hasn't changed much. It's just changed with technology.
Thank you.
Okay, and then Paul has a question.
If I may, and I'm asking this for a friend, and Andrea Kennedy said a priest, an economist, and a journalist walked into a bar. It's not the Poynter Institute group, right, Joe?
Right.
But having said that, the reason I mention that is because economists, right? You've been working with economists. I work with economists, Map Dashboard, and George Hammond, and legislative economists. But income inequality, can we stipulate for your journalistic endeavors, income inequality and its attendant effects are absolutely breaking our democracy into pieces? It seems like, and I ask that for context because you have to, right? You have to context, with the context for your reporting, Joe. How do you do that given that the economy, and it's not the stock market, for those of us, right? How do you now stipulate that and take that as your context for your writing?
I think that I look at it in a very specific way. There is 1/3 of America that didn't vote. There is 1/3 of America that doesn't care about what I write tomorrow. There is 1/3 of America that they are in a place where they are making day-to-day decisions that's best for them and themselves, and they are entirely disengaged from the process. And because they're disengaged from the process, the other 2/3 do what they want. Obviously, there is a group of them that are pushing to make it so the middle class is smaller and the upper class and the 1% get more money. And so these oligarchs that we have now, put us in a difficult position. But, just getting rid of Amazon is a big, hard choice for a lot of people in this room and many others. And, when I briefly worked in Ajo for 4 months, I didn't have a lot of choices. Sometimes Amazon was the only way I was going to get something, whether it was a pen or, something that I needed for my computer. There wasn't a store around the corner to buy it from anymore. And so I think that, we're going to have to re-examine how we participate in capitalism in general. And I think that that is the way that, we can look at inequality. We can also push as union members, as residents, that, we pay more. I mean, I'm going to write an article in a week or so about the personal wealth statements, the financial disclosures for your city council, for your supervisors, for your elected officials at the legislature. Everybody here, we know that they make about $96,000 a year. We pay them that amount of money. Are you mad that some of them have part-time jobs? Should they? Are they doing the work they should be if they already are making nearly six figures, have a dedicated staff? Should they still be, consulting on the side? And so those kind of questions are for you to answer. I'm just posing them.
Yeah, Rod'd like to know to what degree big money, normally seen on the national scene, has invaded control of our local and state political funding.
I think it's a very real thing. I think that there are a lot of, people that win elections by the fact that they have unions and dark money and PACs and leadership groups putting money into things. I don't vote by mailers. You can send me as many mailers as you like, but you're not going to change my mind on how I voted in an election. And so some of it I think is wasted. I really do. I know of a person who ran for the PCC board, and a group got together, raised money for them, and put up TV ads that I never saw, not once.
Yeah.
And so I think that you can still win without having big money behind you, but I think it's a lot harder. And I think it really does change the dynamics of who actually can run for an office. Because if you don't get that big money, they're going to put it behind somebody else. And that money then is going to go to mailers and TV ads and all those things. And it makes it harder.
Yeah.
Knocking on doors and talking to people one by one is a difficult proposition. Getting people to come to a meeting like this isn't always easy. And so getting your message out is hard. These groups will make it easier, but at the same time, you are having to align, take pledges and other things of that nature. And I think that what everybody here on this room wants is that if you voted for me 4 years ago, you voted for what I stood for, not for the people behind me. But I think it happens a lot, even in local races.
Yeah. I have a couple of questions of my own before we close here that I'd like to get to. One is how you see the latest technology unfolding in your practice of journalism, specifically artificial intelligence. I know you guys are using a program called Airwolf now to track legislative action. So tell us about it.
We are. Airwolf is hard coded. It's not AI. So we use it to take information that the legislature puts out, just like when we were talking about election returns, and we use it to take that information, make it concise, and allows people to do bill tracking and things like that. I think that it really looks at that. But if we get to AI, I don't use ChatGPT. I think there's a place for it, but I one night wanted to write about the propositions that people here in Tucson passed. As we talk about Prop 414, I wanted to kind of show a parallel of what Tucsonans have an appetite for and what they don't. And so I asked ChatGPT with that question. It gave me terrible answers. I then challenged ChatGPT to talk about me for a little bit, and it gave me plenty of awards I've never earned. And so it was very kind in that way, and I appreciate that. And I tried to explain to ChatGPT it was wrong, and it's not very good at taking no for an answer. But at the same time, I think there are some really good things. I am a old school reporter. I've got notebooks and pens stashed in my car, stashed at my desk, stashed in my bedroom. I am always ready to have a conversation with somebody on the phone. But at the same time, there are now computer programs that if I have a tape recorder or I'm doing something like this, it will take notes for me. And it will do it well, and it will do it in a way that, makes me a better reporter. And so, as uncomfortable as it has been to shift to it, You know, when I do interview our people, I try to do these kind of interviews because I can just turn on a button and it will record everything, and I'll have essentially a summary of our conversation 10 minutes later.
Yeah.
And so I think how you use these tools is very important. But I think that you have to understand that when it comes to AI, AI only knows what it's been told. It does not have the ability, has not jumped over the uh, the laws of robotics to the point where it can think for itself. All
Yeah.
it can do is recite, regurgitate, and having the name Joe Ferguson means that ChatGPT sometimes thinks I played football back in the 1960s.
Indeed. Yeah, I think people who expect AI to do their thinking for them get in trouble. It can take some of the busy work off your plate, certainly. Like transcriptions used to be a real headache, but much easier now.
Yeah.
So thanks for that answer. Second question I have is, what do you see right now and in the near future, sort of going under the radar, as it were, in Arizona and local politics that's not getting covered or as much notice as you would like in the welter of news that we're getting out of the national level?
I think that at some point we're going to have a big discussion about Arizona and the federal government and our relationship. I think that we don't understand yet how tied we are to the federal government.
Mhm.
And whether you like a certain program or a certain project or not, money is tied into that. And I don't think that we're going to be able to be like California where we can break away. And it's going to change our priorities if funding goes away, if things change, if we do not expand I-10 between Phoenix and Tucson, we're going to have more accidents. When those accidents happen, commerce stops. It's not just, a bummer for you as an individual citizen. It means trucks with produce and goods that stores rely on don't get filled that day. Not to mention, any kind of loss of life or injuries that happen from this. But there are real world consequences to federal funding going away or being paused. And so I think that's a national conversation, and included in that is water. We are having a lot of conversations about how we're going to clean up contamination on the south side from PFAS. We're going to need the federal government's help for that.
Yeah.
We have a very interesting project to build a new water treatment plant. Nobody here likes the words toilet to tap, but I think at the same time, I think we all are going to need water regardless of where it comes from 20 years from now. And so that project is vital to our water security. There is a conversation about building a desalination plant in Mexico so that if we build that, then we don't have to give them their share of the Colorado River anymore. That's important to farmers and agriculture. I think these are, some of the really important things that are ahead of us that we're not deeply focused on right now, but are things that require constant vigilance.
And finally, do you know why the young lady is crying?
I believe that this was a statement where she was in trouble and did not want to call Brad for help. So I think this is a statement on feminism.
Okay, we have
correct.
a call to action from one of our members, and that's James Stevenson. James, kind of give us a thumbnail on what's happening.
Thank you, Joe. Basically, having been alerted and exhorted by Heather Cox Richardson last night about the seriousness of what's going on with the Treasury and USAID cyber breaches that are going on, I've decided that I want to go out to the Pima County Republican headquarters and picket this afternoon. I made a sign, stop Musk cyber coup. I think that this is really, really serious. Basically, now Elon Musk has all the information that the government has on all of us. And another big question is, how much were his minions able to penetrate the State Department intelligence database because of the incursion into the USAID computers? This is a very, very big deal, which could open a doorway into all of the intelligence services databases.
Mm.
So I think, what Heather is saying, a legal response is not going to be adequate. It's going to be too slow. We have to generate as much political blowback as possible, as fast as possible, to try to limit what might happen in this as a result of this. And she actually suggests trying to get Republicans who may not have realized that they were voting for this to be the ones to do the calling. But in the absence of that, I just feel like we have to make some efforts to raise consciousness. And I'm going to be out there from 2:30 to 4:30 today. I think this is something that maybe needs to be done on an ongoing basis for a while, for a few hours at a time. I picked the Republican headquarters instead of Siscomani's office because I think, in line with what Heather said, mobilizing Republicans in general to respond and maybe realize what's going on may be more important than just, I did leave a phone message on Siscomani. But anyway, my email is in there. If you'd like to participate, come along or talk about future events, protests, I would be open to helping with that. Thank you.
Okay, well, Mike, does that about cover everything?
Yeah, I think that wraps it up.
Okay, well, Joe, awesome. What a
Thank you,
great
everybody.
presentation. I'm never going to forget about economists and priests and journalists all in the same room. So what way to go. We'll be back. Would you mind putting your contact information in the chat
Yep.
room?
Absolutely. I'll do it next.
Okay, let's hear it for Joe. Good job.
Thanks, Joe.
everybody.
Hey everybody, it's Senator Mark Kelly. As all of you know, Arizona Democrats have had a lot of important wins over the last few years. We won 2 U.S. Senate races, and we delivered Arizona's electoral votes to President Biden and Vice President Harris. We elected Governor Katie Hobbs, Secretary of State Adrian Fontes, and Attorney General Chris Mays. Now, those elections were close, and our victories mattered. Arizona Democrats from the federal to the local level have delivered real results for our state on critical issues like combating climate change, lowering prescription drug costs, protecting the right to vote, and preventing more restrictions on abortion access. The Democrats of Greater Tucson offers the opportunity to hear from elected officials and candidates about that important work and the issues that matter to them. That information will be invaluable as Arizonans head to the polls. So this election cycle, whether you're signing up to knock doors, make phone calls, or joining the Democrats of Greater Tucson to hear from and speak to Democrats in our area, please know that your voice matters and we need you on this team. Thank you.